And motivation in and of itself is a scam. I don't believe in motivation. I believe in discipline.
Everything I've ever done in my life,
You've
I
seen
didn't
these videos, right? The one saying motivation is useless and discipline is
Everything about
everything.
discipline.
That to
And
succeed,
every
you
day.
just have to grind and push through your feelings. Here's what they will tell you. I tried that approach for 3 years. I woke up at 5 a.m. every day, forced myself through workouts I hated, disciplined my way through projects that drained my souls. And you know what happened? Complete burnout. Today, I'm going to show you what actually works. And it's not what you think. Let me tell you, during those 3 years, every morning was a battle. I slept the alarm, dragged myself out of bed, and white knuckle through a routine I built because some entrepreneur online said I should. I thought I was being disciplined. I thought I was doing it right. But here's the thing. But pure discipline that nobody warns you about is built on force. And force is exhausting. Research from Roe Bowmaster in Florida University shows that willpower is a finite resource. It literally depletes throughout the day. You're not weak for starting with discipline. Your brain is designed this way. So I started asking a different question. Instead of how do I force myself harder, I asked, what if there's a smarter way? And that's when everything changed. Look, I'm not here to tell you discipline is useless. But what if I told you that discipline with motivation is like trying to drive a car with the parking brake on? You might move forward, but you're making it so much harder than it needs to be. The missing ingredient is what psychologists call intrinsic motivation, being driven by genuine interest rather than external pressure. This isn't just feel-good advice. Harvard researcher Teresa Anbil studied thousands of workers and found that people produce their most creative, highest quality work when they're intrinsically motivated. Here's why this matters. When you're forcing yourself through discipline alone, you're using your prefrontal cortex, the part of your brain that handles self-control, and is burning massive amounts of energy. But when you're intrinsically motivated, you're tapping into your brain's reward system. You're working with your natural wiring, not guess it. Think about it this way. Nobody has to discipline themselves to check Instagram or play video games. Why? Because they're motivated to do it. Now imagine bringing even a fraction of that natural drive to your actual goals. Now, let me be clear about something. Because I know what you're thinking. This sounds great, but what about when I don't feel motivated? And that's the right question. Because here's the truth. Motivation fluctuates. Some days you'll wake up fired up, other days you won't. But here's where people get it wrong. They think that means you should just rely on discipline. What they miss is you can engineer motivation. You don't have to wait for it to strike like lightning. Let me give you a practical example. Say you're working on a project you're not excited about. Maybe it's a report for a work or a class assignment. Pure discipline says sit down and force yourself through the whole thing. But that approach kills your creativity and makes the work mediocre. The smarter approach, find one part of the project that genuinely interests you. Maybe it's not writing the full report, but it's designing the perfect chart. Maybe it's not the entire assignment, but it's the research phase where you get to dive deep into something fascinating. When you focus your energy on the parts you actually care about, something interesting happens. The quality skyrockets, and often the momentum carries you through the less exciting part. You're not grinding through discipline, you're using strategic motivation. Here's the part that sold me on this approach: sustainability. But here's what nobody tells you about the discipline-only part. It has an expiration date. You can force yourself for weeks, maybe months, but eventually you crash. I've seen it happen over and over. Someone goes all in on discipline, make incredible progress for 90 days, then completely falls off and never gets back on the track. Why? Because they built the entire system on force, and force always run out. But when you build your life around things that genuinely motivates you, even parts of things, you create something different. You create a process you actually want to sustain. And here's what research from Stanford Carol Dweck shows. People who find intrinsic value in their work persist longer and perform better over time. This isn't about making everything feels like rainbow and sunshine. Some parts of any goal will be challenging, but the difference is this. When you're motivated, challenges feels like a puzzle to solve. When you're just disciplined, they feel like walls to bash your head against. And the best part, the quality of your work reflects this. Someone forcing themselves through discipline produces good enough work. Someone genuinely engaged produces excellence, not because they're trying harder, but because they actually care about the outcome. Alright, so if motivation is a superpower, how do you actually access it? Because just be passionate is garbage advice. Let me give you the real strategy. Okay, step 1. Find your anchor point. This is your why, but not the surface level why. Not I should be healthy healthier or I need to make money, dig deeper. What specifically about these goals lights something up inside you? For me, with YouTube, it wasn't I want to be famous. It was I love the feeling of talking a complex idea and making it click for someone. That specific moment when someone goes, oh, I get it now. And that's what's drive me. So I designed everything around creating more of those moments. Step 2. With curiosity, not commitment. Here's something controversial. I actually think watching new tutorial videos can be productive if you use that curiosity as fuel. Have you ever gotten obsessed with learning something new and spent hours watching videos about it? Most productivity gurus says that that's procrastination. I say it's reconnaissance. Your brain is telling you it's interested. That burning curiosity, that motivation trying to emerge. The key is to channel it. Use that fire to take the first actual step. Watch the tutorials. Feel the excitement build. Then immediately, while that energy is hot, take action. Even if it's just for 10 minutes. Because here's the secret. The hardest part of any project is starting. Once you're in motion, especially motion fueled by genuine interest, momentum takes over. Now, let's address the elephant in the room. What do you do on days when motivation just isn't there? Because those days happen to everyone, including me. Here's my approach. And it's different from pure discipline. On low motivation days, I don't try to force myself through my full routine. Instead, I use what I call minimum viable effort. I ask, what's the smallest version of this task that I can do while stay connected to why I care? If I'm supposed to write a script, but I'm not feeling it, I don't force myself to write 1,000 words. Instead, I spend 10 minutes just outlining ideas I find interesting. If I'm supposed to work out but my energy is zero, I'll do one set of something I actually enjoy, even if it's just stretching. This is not giving up. This is strategic persistence. Because here's what happens often. Once you start, even with minimal effort, the motivation starts to build. But even if it doesn't, you stayed in the game. You didn't break the chain completely. And here's the critical part. You didn't force yourself to hate the thing you're trying to build. You kept the relationship positive. That matters more long term than any single day of maximum effort. The final piece is something most people completely miss. Your environment shapes your motivation. You can't just willpower your way to staying motivated. Everything around you is draining your energy. This is where you need to be strategic. Think of motivation like a fire. It needs fuel. So, you need to deliberately engineer your environment to provide that fuel. First, curate your inputs. The podcasts you listen to, the videos you watch, the books you read. They're either feeding your motivation or starving it. I'm not saying only consume positive content, but be intentional about what ideas you're letting into your brain. Second, find your people. This is huge. If you're trying to build a fitness habit, don't just force yourself to the gym alone every day. Find people who are also genuinely excited about fitness. Not people who shame you into going, but people who make the process more enjoyable. Research from behavioral economist Katie Milkman shows that social motivation is incredibly powerful. When you are surrounded by people pursuing similar goals with genuine enthusiasm, their motivation becomes contagious. Third, design your space. Make the things you want to do visible and accessible. If you want to read more, don't hide your books in the closet. Put them everywhere. If you want to create more, set up your workspace so it invites you in rather than feeling like a chore to access. Here's the final truth I want to leave you with. This isn't about choosing motivation or discipline. It's about understanding which one to use, when, and how they work together. Start with motivation. Use it to build momentum, to create work you're proud of, to make the process sustainable. Let motivation prove to yourself that you can follow through on commitments. Then, when you hit those inevitable low motivation days, and you'll have something stronger than discipline. You'll have evidence that you're someone who shows up, evidence that this goal matters to you, evidence of past successes to draw on. This is what psychologists call self-efficacy, confidence in your ability to achieve goals, and it's built through motivated action, not forced discipline. So yes, sometimes you need discipline, sometimes you need to push through when it's hard, but by that point, you're not just grinding on willpower alone, you're drawing on a deeper well of motivation. Identify and prove that you've built over time. That's the approach that actually lasts. Not force, not grinding. Strategic motivation that compounds into sustainable discipline. So, here's what I want you to take away from this. Stop asking, what must I do? Start asking actually, what part of this actually excites me? Because When you find that answer and build around it, everything changes. You don't have to live like a machine. You don't have to force yourself through joyless grind. There's a smarter way. A way that produces better work, feels more sustainable, and actually creates a life you want to live. The discipline gurus are completely wrong. You will need some discipline. But they're missing the most important piece. Motivation isn't the enemy of discipline. It's the foundation. Here's my challenge for you. Pick one goal you've been trying to force through discipline. Just one. Now ask yourself, what's the part of this that I could actually enjoy? What's the angle that makes me curious? Drop the answer in the comment. I read every single one. And if this video shifted how you think about motivation and discipline, hit that like button. Subscribe for more content on building a life that's both a successful and sustainable one. I'll see you guys in the next one.